Can you just give me a rundown, give our listeners a rundown on how you ended up with Gator?
Yes, I can. I actually started with another little retrieving Jack Russell, and his name was Moose, and he was, probably like that one dog that everyone says they have that one dog that they connect with, and as much as I love Gator, I definitely connected with Moose a little bit more, and he wasn't formally trained at all, though. I mean, that was the thing, is that my dad, I mean, it wasn't even me. My dad just took him dove hunting one day, and he just realized, and I think maybe he took him quail hunting first, but I was probably 15 at the time, and I wasn't really into bird hunting, and he took him quail hunting or dove hunting or something like that. And he came back and he's like, this dog loves to retrieve. Like, it's the weirdest thing in the world. And he's always had a lab. And so he started taking him teal hunting, and, and then he started picking up mallards and stuff like that. And I got into training dogs in college, and Moose was kind of back and forth between my dad and I. I got into, training dogs, and I had Moose with me sometimes, and I was duck hunting with my dad. And of course, for me, duck hunting was all about taking the dog. And so, we started taking Moose all the time. I mean, my dad already took him quite a bit, but we just took him all the time. We didn't care. He'd sit in the layout blind, and he wasn't formally trained. We would go, and, he would pick up a goose and he'd bring it half the way back, and he'd start shaking it. You know what I mean? And then sometimes he'd bring him all the way back, but we didn't care. It was just so much fun. Mm-hmm. And as he got older, I thought, well, I'm just going to see, now that I'm training dogs professionally, I really want to see how far I could get my next Jack Russell, because obviously Moose isn't going to be around forever. And so once he passed away, I ended up with Gator through the same breeder. And he is related to Moose, but it's pretty far down the line. I mean, he's not same bloodlines, but anyway, so that's really how I ended up deciding I wanted to train a Jack Russell. And I thought, well, I'll probably get him through force fetch or something like that. You know what I mean? And that'll be great. And if I get him through force fetch, this is going to be like the coolest Jack Russell ever. I don't even care if he handles. Well, I started doing like three-handed casting and stuff with him when he was probably less than 4 months old, just little fun puppy stuff, with treats, and then moved on to bumpers, and he had a pretty good hold. And so I went ahead and started doing some retrieving with him, and he just loved it. Like, he was so excited about it. And so I was like, well, I mean, I think I'm going to be able to handle him.
I mean, so this was just like a happy accident. Your dad saw Moose working, and you realized something about this breed that you didn't know. So my question with that, when you see this dog that, theoretically shouldn't be hunting doves or teal or quail or whatever, then you see it working, and it's kind of a novelty, but you see that that glimmer of like, man, this dog could do this. Was that dog, was Moose, I mean, had he been introduced to water? Because you said you started teal hunting with him. Like, how did he handle water retrieves?
Well, we lived on a lake growing up, and so he always would get in the water with other dogs and stuff like that. And so he just naturally, he was used to it. I mean, he would get in, like, when all our labs would swim together and play, just out by the lake, he'd get in and chase them around, and he just loved the water. It didn't really bother him. What I will say about Moose versus Gator is Moose, I didn't have a dog vest for him because Gator's is custom made. And we had these little, those little life jackets that you get at like Academy. Mm-hmm. And we put it on Moose, and he actually hated it. Like, it kind of restricted him, and he didn't really like it. And so we just took it off him, and we never had any type of dog vest to keep him warm. And we hunted him in some really, I mean, probably questionable, like, some people would be like, okay, I would never take my dog hunting in that. I mean, to me, I guess I'm from Texas, but yep. I would take my labs any day of the week with a dog vest. Or, I don't really take Gator in cold water as much because he loves the water, and he really hates the water once it gets cold. And so I just don't want to ruin him of that.
Yep.
But anyway, Moose, I mean, like, I remember one day we went, it was like 17 degrees, and we were keeping the water up with an ice heater, and Moose just like got right in and went and got this mallard. I mean, granted, it was like maybe 15 yards, if that, you know what I mean? But he just didn't care. And then we'd get him out and we had a pit blind and we put the dog, you know, the heater, the little Mr. Buddy heater on him and he was fine. So he didn't swim great, but he loved the water.
Yep. So, and I mean, that's sort of, I asked that because I always think of it, you know, I'm up here in Minnesota, you're down in Texas. And so I always think about, you know, the water temperature is a big factor for us up here. Even if you're running labs or whatever, you're always considering, you know, how cold really is it? But, you know, I know some of the places you hunt, it can get just as cold. And so you're always thinking about that. And I'm just wondering, like, personally, I'm like, can a Jack Russell handle cold water? Or like, and, you know, I think what's interesting about what you're saying there is those dogs with Moose and now Gator, the drive to some extent, you know, the drive to get that bird to do their job, you know, it kind of overrides the discomfort. It overrides, you know, like a dog with not a lot of go juice in it might not go into that cold water. Yeah. But you're saying these dogs, you know, they're going to go.
Well, yes and no. Funny story. So Moose loved the water. He didn't have a lot of problems with colder temperatures. Gator, however, we've and it's the craziest thing. I did swim by with him. I actually did swim by. Had this little tiny pond that I found just for gators so that I could do a gator size swim by, you know. Mm-hmm. And he did it and he was great. And, you know, he wasn't as easy to train through swim by as a lab was, but it was fine. You know, it was awesome. And technical water, he doesn't have any issues with, like tech ponds. And I don't know if it's because he can see the other side or what. But anyway, so 2 years ago, we did a hunt with RNTV. And we always hunt the marsh. And I told Jimbo before the hunt, I said, look, I'm just going to let you know, I've tried to hunt gator in the marsh a couple times and he's not having it. Like, he doesn't want to jump off the dog stand. He's afraid of that. You know, these are things that I haven't really been able to work on as much because in a tech pond, if he is jumping off a dog stand, he's mainly jumping out of it onto land and then gradually going into the water. So we were trying to literally figure out, like, what is it? Is it the cold? Is it this open water that he's having to get into in the marsh now with all this vegetation? Like, what's the problem? So anyway, turns out, I mean, that whole hunt, that trip, we got to hunt the field like twice. Thank goodness, because we got some gator footage and then we went and we hunted the marsh a couple times and we took him one hunt and we're hunting out of a pit blind and, you know, it was a gradual slope into the water, but he just wasn't having it. It was kind of cold and he was just like, yeah, I'm just not going to go in there. And so Jimbo had to send his dog like pretty much every single time. And Gator would just sit at the edge of the water and whine, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of fun. I mean, it's kind of comical because it's like, you know, it's so embarrassing. They come all the way there and he's like, won't even get in the water.
Well, you know, the few conversations we've had, the one thing that I've noticed about you is you tell the truth about your dogs. And I love that because I run into people who are just blinded, you know, by their dogs. And it's only, you know, like it's like what we do with ourselves. We think we're pretty awesome all the time. Right. But really, you know, we all have holes in our game and, you know, Gator. So when he's sitting there in the pit blind and he won't go. Do you think, I'm just curious, like from your perspective, is that because he's just not comfortable? No, I mean, I don't mean like physically comfortable. I mean, like, new environment, new experience. Yeah. Is he just like not confident there yet? Like how old is he?
Yeah, I think so. He's 3. Okay. And actually this year, we didn't do a show with RNTV again, just because the dates didn't work out. But Lee Chose came down and we did some pictures with Gator and it was hilarious because again, the first hunt out, you know, we take Gator and all we have is just Lee and I and Gator. He just, again, will not get in the water and he won't jump off the dog stand this time. And I said, Lee, look, I'm telling you, I don't know if the dog's going to get in the water and I'm not sure if I really want to force him like a lab. I would totally force him into the water because I'm sorry, look, we work on this in training and you're going to get forced into that water if you don't want to go. That's just what it is. I mean, if it's not because of like extreme cold temperatures or something like that. Yep. But I just said, you know what? I don't know if I want to push it. And honestly, I wasn't really sure how to handle that. Like I even asked Lee, I was like, what do you think? Like, do you think I should try to force him and get him in there or what? You know what I mean? And he's
Yeah.
like, I don't think so. You know, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to do it. I mean, he's a Jack Russell.
Yep.
He doesn't do this, you know, naturally. Well, I mean, naturally, yes, he loves to retrieve, but he doesn't naturally. That's not what his breed was meant to do, is get in the water and swim long distances. You know what I mean? And so anyway, the next day, I think, or maybe I think it was actually that afternoon, it had warmed up and we went and we sat in a pit blind and we took Gator. And this time, and I think it was the temperature and I think a mixture of he wasn't on a dog stand then, so he could just gradually walk into the water. Mm-hmm. So we shot a couple birds and sure enough, Gator gets in and goes and gets them. And so I think it really is like a learning curve because it's almost like stage fright. You know what I mean? You get out there and you're doing the real thing. And people can do as much as they can to make training like hunting, but it's really never the same because it's chaotic when you get out there and you're hunting, and running blinds is totally different. Half the time you don't even know where the bird is.
Yep.
And so that's kind of, I think that as he gets older, he might get a little better with that.
Well, he'll get more confidence, but I mean, that's a good lesson there with any breed. You know, like you mentioned a lab, like getting a lab into the water, and water introduction with a lab generally is a non-issue. It's pretty easy if you do it correctly, right? And you don't run into too many labs that are hesitant to get in the water. You might run into labs who are hesitant to jump off of something to get into the water right away, but you can work with them on that. But, you know, for a breed like the Jack Russell, you know, they're not, like you said, they weren't bred to be jumping in the water. And so you're kind of taking, you know, you're working with the good part, which they were bred to be aggressive and chasers and get after stuff. And they carry that with them genetically. But now you're asking him to, you know, use that drive, but in a way that's totally different from, you know, what they were bred for. So I mean, you made the right choice. Don't force him, because what good is it going to do? And like you said, he'll get there probably. And so, do you think, like when I hear you talk about this experience with him specifically, it's so interesting because it's like I hear this kind of story from dog trainers all the time. So it's not Jack Russell's. That's kind of a novelty, but it's not. It's like parallel thinking where you have this kind of breed and you're like, okay, now I got to figure out how to get the most out of this dog, and it's not a lab, you know, or it's not a GSP or something. And so as like a dog trainer, I mean, how valuable is that for you to be working with this dog that's in a crazy environment for its breed, and you're still bringing out all these cool things?
It's interesting because every day is a new challenge. And he's 3.
Yeah.
And actually what's hilarious, I mean, every time I run him, like he just cracks me up. You know what I mean? Like I have like a whistle in my mouth, and when I run a blind, some of the time, and even when I'm by myself, I have to like keep myself from laughing so that I can blow my whistle, because he's just so funny. Like sometimes he goes on autopilot and he's just like, yeah, I'm not going to sit for you. I'm just going to go. I know exactly where the bird is. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting learning his breed, because with Moose was just fun. And I didn't do a lot of training with him. I knew how stubborn he was, but I thought at the time, well, that's because, you know, he wasn't formally trained. Well, no, that's just Jack Russell's. And so anyway, I've got a Boykin right now. It's funny you say that, because I mostly have trained labs. So aside from Gator, I've trained a poodle pointer and a Draghar and a Boykin. So I've had a little bit of a variety, but it is very interesting to see how each breed learns and does their thing, you know, differently. Because this Boykin has been, and I've told, you know, his owner, so hopefully he listens to this, because he's heard me say like on a daily basis, he's not like a lab. He is totally, he's stubborn, kind of like a Jack Russell. And I mean, I've only got experience with one other one, and the other one was the exact same way. And I mean, he loves to retrieve those. So this other one didn't fully love retrieving, and we just did obedience with it. But this dog loves to retrieve, and he's getting there, but we're having to do it a little differently than I would with a lab. And it's, you know, a little bit more slow going and, a little bit more patience and stuff like that. And you learn, well, what you really do learn, honestly, is that labs are extremely easy to train compared to any other breed. But, it's cool to learn the different breeds and see, how each of them, gets to the end result.
Yep. Well, that's, I hear that a lot too about labs, and it is true. I mean, they want to work for you. If you get one with a good bloodlines, that sucker is going to be a retrieving machine and a pleaser. But they all have different attributes. If you're really looking for an upland dog, you might not want to go for a lab. You might want to go for that Boykin or something like that. And the stubborn thing, it's sort of hard. I don't know. This is just speculation on my part, but I know Jack Russells, I think originally they were fox dogs, and then they became kind of badger digger dogs, and they were used, I think at first to run foxes, and then they were used more to dig stuff out. Mm-hmm. And, you think about, they're like what, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, maybe?
Yeah. Gator and moose were both like 18 to 20 pounds.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say they're 20 pounds, pure muscle at 20 pounds. And you're like, hey, go dig that badger out of that hole. Like that dog, if that dog's not stubborn, it's not going to do it. I mean, because that's a crazy thing to ask of a little dog like that. And so that's probably why, at some points Gator's like, I'm not doing this for you. He probably thinks he could kick your ass because his ancestors used to dig badgers out of holes.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I'm not steady. My breed isn't supposed to be steady. What are you talking about? Like, what is steadiness? You know what I mean? And that's been hard for him. Like you get a really high drive lab, sometimes it's better to only throw little fun bumpers in the yard and do force fetch and, then start doing your field marks once your obedience is very, very solid. Now, if you have a lab that is low drive, you might want to get them out in the field pretty early and run some marks and get them really excited about gunshots and stuff like that. Yep. So I think with Gator, I freaked out that he's not a lab, so I'm going to have to really instill this at an early age. Well, I was throwing fun little toys for him in the hallway at my house when he was 7 weeks old. And then, I had him running off a dummy launcher when he was like 3-4 months. You know what I mean? He was already like picking up little thunder bumpers. And I think I screwed up there because I wasn't very strict on steadiness and all that. Really, I could have force fetched him and done all of that and then started running marks with him like a lab. But I just freaked out. So I part of me wonders, could he be different had I trained him differently? But I just didn't know at that time. You know what I mean? It was my first Jack Russell experience. Yep. So the best lesson in there, besides just being self-conscious enough to go, what could I have done different, or what should I do differently in the future, is when you're talking steadiness with any kind of bird dog, any kind of working dog, I should say, that's unnatural in all of them. I mean, it's, and that is true. That's a good point.
Steadiness is like, and this, you duck hunt, they are not wired to sit still. Like they are not wired to sit by your side and wait for all the action to unfold and then have you go, okay, buddy, now do your thing. That's a thing we train them. And it's the hardest. I mean, maybe not the hardest, but it is one of the hardest things to get in any dog because it is so, it's like, I talk about this all the time. I have twin 7-year-old girls. Like, you want them to sit still? Good luck, dude. Like, good luck. Point. Yeah, that's just not in them. And so that's like, we like training the retrieves because they want to do that, and that's fun. And we can kind of feel like, oh, we're really kicking ass as trainers because. Well,
and that's the reward if you're steady, so.
Yeah, but we don't, it's easy to train toward the dog's strengths and be like, well, if this dog loves to retrieve, that's what I want to do with it. But the hard stuff is the stuff you probably should be doing, like the steadiness. And I really think I always say this, like, if you go elk hunting, you'll never get in too good a shape to go elk hunting, right? Like you're never going to be like, oh, I overdid it. I'm in too good a shape for these mountains. You'll always be like, I could have done better. With steadiness in bird dogs, I think we look at that in even like a super steady dog, you could probably do better. Like you could
Yes.
probably do it better. And so that's like anyone listening to this, like if you're thinking about what's important in my dog, not just hunting dogs, any kind of working dog, and your dog at home, which is what most of our dogs are most of the time, is just a house dog. Steadiness is huge. So I'm so glad you brought that up because I think it's so important to talk about.